When 8-year-old Leo, a boy with shadows in his eyes and clothes that hung off his bony frame, whispered the 5 words that would change everything, he didn't expect anyone to truly hear him. He was just a foster kid, used to being invisible at loud, happy events like the Iron Sentinels MC's annual charity barbecue. But the man he whispered them to was not just anyone. He was Cole Train, a 52-year-old biker whose past as a firefighter had trained him to see the smoke before the flames. The boy's quiet confession, "They lock the fridge at night," was a wisp of smoke that signaled a raging fire of neglect. Cole Train's decision to act on those 5 words set off a chain of events that would shatter the facade of a foster home, expose a hidden cruelty, and forge an unbreakable bond between a lost little boy and a brotherhood of bikers who decided that night that no child in their city would ever go hungry again. The air at the Iron Sentinels clubhouse smelled of grilled hot dogs, exhaust fumes, and freshly cut grass. It was their 10th annual Community Outreach Day, an event designed to soften their public image and raise money for the local children's hospital. Families from all over the county milled about the large, fenced-in property, their kids bouncing in an inflatable castle shaped like a motorcycle. The sun was high and hot, glinting off the chrome of 24 Harley-Davidsons parked in a perfect, intimidating row. Amidst the controlled chaos stood a man who was the living embodiment of the club's ethos. His name was Robert Kane, but no one had called him that in 30 years. To the world, he was Cole Train. At 52, he was built like the freight engines he was named after, solid, powerful, and hard to stop once he got moving. A thick, graying beard covered the lower half of his face, and his arms were a tapestry of faded tattoos that told the story of his life, his platoon insignia from the army, the firefighter's cross from his 25 years with the city fire department, and the roaring sentinel of his club. He had retired from the department 2 years prior, but the instincts it had forged in him were permanent. He was a man trained to run toward trouble, to look for the signs others missed. He was manning the soda and water station, a simple job that let him observe the crowd. He liked seeing the community he'd once protected in a different capacity come together. He saw laughter and joy. He saw families making memories. Then he saw the Hendersons. They were a couple in their late 40s, dressed just a little too nicely for a biker barbecue. Martha Henderson had a brittle smile that never reached her eyes, and her husband, Gary, had a habit of gripping the arm of the small boy between them with unnecessary force. That boy was Leo. Leo was a wisp of a child. His t-shirt, which bore the faded logo of a cartoon character, seemed 2 sizes too big for his narrow shoulders. His jeans were cinched tight with a belt, but they still sagged around his waist. His face was pale and thin, dominated by large, watchful brown eyes that darted around as if expecting a threat from any direction. He never smiled. Cole Train had seen kids like him before. He'd carried them out of burning buildings, their small bodies limp with smoke inhalation. He'd seen them at accident scenes, their eyes wide with a shock too deep for tears. He knew what a scared kid looked like. And Leo was a scared kid. The Hendersons guided Leo through the crowd, putting on a show of parental care that felt rehearsed and hollow. They bought him a single hot dog, which he ate with a slow, mechanical precision, as if he were trying to make it last as long as possible. When he was done, Gary Henderson took the paper plate from him and tossed it in the trash with a look of finality. The boy's eyes followed a platter of brownies being carried past, a flicker of longing so intense it was almost a physical presence. Cole Train felt the first thrum of unease, a low-frequency vibration in his gut that had served him well for decades. It was the same feeling he'd get just before a roof was about to collapse or a backdraft was ready to blow. Something was wrong. He watched them for the next hour. The Hendersons drank expensive bottled water and talked to other adults, keeping Leo tethered to them by a hand on his shoulder. They didn't offer him anything else to eat or drink, despite the sweltering heat. The boy just stood there, silent and still, a ghost at a feast. Cole Train's instincts, honed by years of assessing crisis situations, began to catalogue the evidence. The boy's low weight. The ill-fitting clothes. The hypervigilance. The parents' performative affection that was betrayed by the tension in their grips and the coldness in their eyes. Each detail was a small piece of kindling, building a pyre of suspicion in his mind. He decided to do a little reconnaissance. He grabbed 2 bottles of water and walked over to the family, forcing a friendly, disarming smile. "Hey folks, enjoying the day?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. Martha Henderson's smile tightened. "Oh, yes. It's a wonderful event." "For a good cause," Coltrane nodded, his eyes on Leo. "Looks like the little man could use a water." "It's hot out here," he offered a bottle to the boy. Before Leo could reach for it, Gary Henderson stepped slightly in front of him. "He's fine. We're about to leave anyway. Every kid needs to stay hydrated." Coltrane pressed gently, not backing down. He held the bottle out again, directly in Leo's line of sight. Leo looked from the water bottle to his foster father's face, a flicker of fear crossing his own. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head and looked at the ground. The silent refusal was louder than a scream. A kid doesn't turn down a cold drink on a 90-degree day unless he's been taught to. Taught that accepting things from others is dangerous. Taught that he doesn't deserve it. Coltrane's blood went cold. The final piece of kindling had been laid. All it needed was a spark. He looked directly at Leo, softening his gaze. He saw the desperation behind the boy's carefully constructed mask of indifference. He was a prisoner sending out a signal. "You sure, little man?" Coltrane asked, his voice quiet. Plenty to go around. That was when it happened. As the Hendersons began to pull him away, Leo looked up at Coltrane, his eyes wide and pleading. He leaned in just enough for his voice to carry the few feet between them, a whisper that was almost lost in the noise of the party. "They lock the fridge at night." The words landed like a punch to the gut. They lock the fridge at night. It was the spark. The fire of suspicion roared into a blaze of certainty. In that single, horrifying sentence, the entire picture came into focus: the boy's hunger, his thinness, his fear. This wasn't just poor parenting. This was systematic cruelty. Coltrane's mind, trained for emergency, cycled through his options in a split second. He could confront them here and now, but they'd just deny it and drag the kid away. He could call the police, but without more, it might just be a wellness check that tipped them off and made things worse for Leo later. He needed to act, but he needed to be smart about it. As the Hendersons turned to leave, pulling a compliant Leo with them, Coltrane made his decision. The risk of being wrong was nothing compared to the risk of being right and doing nothing. He would not let that boy walk out of his sight. He gave a quick, sharp whistle. Across the lawn, 2 of his club brothers, a giant of a man named Grizz and a wiry ex-Marine called Stitch, looked up from the grill. Coltrane gave them a subtle hand signal, a slow, downward chop. It was their code for trouble. For a situation that needed a calm, steady, and immovable presence. They nodded, wiped their hands on their aprons, and began to move. They didn't run. They just walked, flanking Coltrane as he strode purposefully toward the parking lot. The Hendersons were halfway to their bay sedan when they heard the crunch of gravel behind them. They turned to see 3 large, leather-clad men blocking their path. Coltrane was in the center, his face a mask of cold resolve. Gary Henderson puffed out his chest. "Can we help you?" he asked, his voice laced with false bravado. "Actually, I think we can help you," Coltrane said, his voice level and dangerously calm. "Seems your boy is hungry." "Our mistake for not making that clearer." He gestured back toward the food tables. "Why don't you let him go get a burger?" On the house, Martha's brittle smile reappeared. "That's very kind, but he's already eaten. We have to get going." "Appointments." "The appointment can wait," Coltrane stated. It was not a request. He saw the panic flash in their eyes. They knew they were caught, but they weren't going to fold easily. Gary tightened his grip on Leo's arm, and the boy winced in pain. That was the last mistake Gary Henderson would make that day. Seeing the boy's pain, something primal and protective surged through Coltrane. The firefighter, the soldier, the sentinel, they all merged into one. "Let go of the boy," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl that vibrated with barely suppressed fury. Grizz and Stitch moved, positioning themselves on either side of the car, their massive forms casually blocking the doors. They didn't say a word. They didn't have to. Their presence was a statement. You are not going anywhere. Who do you think you are? Gary blustered, trying to sound indignant. This is our son. I'll call the police. I already have, Coltrane said, holding up his phone. He had dialed 911 the moment he started walking. They're on their way. We can all have a nice chat when they get here. The color drained from the Hendersons' faces. The mask of suburban respectability crumbled, revealing the ugly truth beneath. They were cornered. Martha started to stammer. This is a misunderstanding. He's a difficult child. He lies. Coltrane ignored her. He knelt, bringing himself down to eye level with Leo. The boy was trembling, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a fragile, burgeoning hope. Hey, kid, Coltrane said softly, his voice gentle for the first time. It's gonna be okay. No one's going to hurt you. He looked at Gary's hand, still clamped on the boy's arm. Sir, I'm going to ask you one last time. Let go of the boy. Each word was a block of ice. Gary Henderson looked from Coltrane's unwavering eyes to the two mountains of muscle flanking his car, and his bravado finally shattered. He released Leo's arm as if it were red-hot. Leo stumbled forward, instinctively moving toward the only person who had offered him safety. He stopped just short of Coltrane, unsure what to do. Coltrane simply held out his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Leo took it. The boy's hand was small and cold in his own. The wail of sirens grew closer, a welcome sound for once. Two police cruisers pulled into the lot, lights flashing. The officers who stepped out were young, but their expressions were serious. They saw the scene, a terrified child holding the hand of a biker, a nervous-looking couple, and two other bikers standing guard. One of the officers, a Sergeant Miller, approached Coltrane cautiously. What's going on here? Coltrane didn't let go of Leo's hand. This boy is in foster care with this couple, he said calmly, nodding toward the Hendersons. He told me they're not feeding him. Said they locked the refrigerator. He looked down at Leo. You see how thin he is. You see the fear in his eyes. My gut tells me he's telling the truth. Sergeant Miller looked at Leo, then at the Hendersons, who were now trying to look like the victims. He'd been a cop long enough to trust the gut feeling of a man like Coltrane, especially a retired firefighter. They saw things. He knelt next to Coltrane. Hey there, buddy. I'm Sergeant Miller. Is what this man said true? Leo looked at Coltrane, who gave him a reassuring squeeze of the hand. The boy took a deep breath and nodded, a single, silent tear finally tracing a path down his dusty cheek. That was all they needed. The atmosphere shifted from tense standoff to official procedure. While one officer began questioning the Hendersons, who immediately launched into a tirade of denials and accusations, Sergeant Miller radioed for a Child Protective Services caseworker to come to the scene. Grizz and Stitch remained by the car, silent sentinels ensuring the Hendersons didn't try to flee. The party music from the clubhouse seemed a world away. Here in the parking lot, a life was being quietly and carefully rescued. A female officer with a kind face arrived and knelt with Sergeant Miller. She introduced herself as Officer Davis. She had a small teddy bear in her hand, which she offered to Leo. The boy looked at it, then at Coltrane, as if for permission. It's for you, kid, Coltrane said. Go on. Leo took the bear, clutching it to his chest like a shield. The social worker, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, arrived within 20 minutes. She had a calm, no-nonsense demeanor that immediately commanded respect. She conferred with Sergeant Miller, then came over to Coltrane and Leo. Mr. Kane, she asked, using his real name. Miller must have told her. Thank you. My name is Sarah. I'm here to help Leo. She spoke to Leo in a low, soothing voice, explaining that he was going to come with her to a safe place. A place with food. A place where all the doors were unlocked. Leo didn't let go of Coltrane's hand. He looked up at the big biker, his eyes asking the question he couldn't voice. Are you sure? Is this safe? Cold Train understood. He had been the first domino, the first person to believe him. The boy needed to know he wasn't being passed off into another nightmare. Sarah's a friend, Cold Train said with a certainty he didn't entirely feel but knew the boy needed to see. She's going to make sure you get a hot meal and a warm bed. And I'm going to check on you. I promise. That was enough. Leo finally released his hand and allowed Sarah to lead him to her car. Before he got in, he turned back and looked at Cold Train. He didn't say anything. He just held up the teddy bear in a small gesture of acknowledgement. Of thanks. Cold Train nodded back. Stay strong, little man. As Sarah's car pulled away, taking Leo to safety, Sergeant Miller walked over. The Hendersons were now sitting in the back of a police cruiser, their faces pale with the reality of their situation. You did a good thing here today, Kane, Miller said, clapping a hand on Cold Train's shoulder. We've had some anonymous calls about that house before, but nothing we could ever make stick. They always put on a good show. Your gut feeling just gave this kid a fighting chance. Cold Train just watched the taillights of Sarah's car disappear down the road. He felt a profound sense of relief, but also a deep, simmering anger. Anger that a child could be so starved, not just for food, but for safety and kindness, in a world with so much of it to give. Grease came and stood beside him. You want us to follow them? Make sure they get where they're going. Cold Train shook his head. No. The authorities have him now. His safe. He turned and looked back at his clubhouse, at the families and the laughter, at the tables piled high with food. But our job isn't done that night. After the last family had gone home and the grounds were cleaned, Cold Train called an emergency meeting of the Iron Sentinels. They gathered around the heavy oak table in their meeting room, the mood somber. He told them everything. He told them about the boy's thin frame, the fear in his eyes, and the 5 whispered words that had broken his heart. They locked the fridge at night, he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. That happened in our city. On our watch. The heavy silence filled the room. These were hard men, men who had seen their share of the world's ugliness. But the thought of a child being deliberately starved struck a nerve deep within their collective conscience. So what are we gonna do about it? Stitch asked, his voice tight. We're going to make sure it never happens again, Cold Train declared. Not here. Not if we can help it. And so, an idea was born. An idea fueled by righteous anger and a shared sense of duty. It started small, a simple plan to stock the pantries of local foster homes and group homes. But it grew quickly. They called it the Open Fridge Project. A year passed. The Hendersons were convicted of criminal neglect and child endangerment. They lost their foster license permanently and served time in county jail. Their names faded into a cautionary tale. Leo's name, however, became a legend. He had been placed in emergency care, and then with a new foster family, a warm, loving couple named the Garcias who had 2 other children and a golden retriever. For the first few months, Leo was quiet and withdrawn. He ate his food quickly, always watching to see if someone would take it away. He hoarded snacks in his room, hiding them under his bed like treasures. Cold Train kept his promise. He visited Leo, at first with the social worker present, and then, once the Garcias saw the incredible bond between the man and the boy, he was welcomed as a friend of the family. He never came empty-handed, always bringing a small toy or a book. He never brought food. He wanted Leo to understand that his value wasn't tied to providing meals, it was inherent. Slowly, with the patience of the Garcias and the steady, quiet support of his giant, leather-clad friend, Leo began to heal. He learned that the refrigerator in his new home was never locked. He learned that asking for a second helping was met with a smile, not a scowl. He learned that love wasn't a performance, it was a quiet, constant presence. He started to gain weight. The shadows receded from his eyes, replaced by the mischievous glint of a normal 9-year-old boy. He joined a little league team. He made friends. He laughed. Meanwhile, the Open Fridge Project exploded. The Iron Sentinels leveraged their connections and their intimidating reputation for good. They organized food drives, fundraisers, and motorcycle runs that drew hundreds of riders from across the state. They partnered with local grocery stores for donations. They bought several large commercial freezers for their clubhouse, which became a de facto food bank for the city's child services network. Social workers now had a place they could call any time, day or night, when they placed a child in a new home. An Iron Sentinel would mount his bike and deliver a starter kit, a box filled with groceries, snacks, fresh fruit, and a gift card for more. The box always included a small, stuffed teddy bear, just like the one Officer Davis had given Leo. The project changed the club. It gave them a new purpose beyond their weekend rides and brotherhood. They were no longer just the Iron Sentinels. They were the guardians of the city's most vulnerable children. They became fixtures at foster care awareness events, their bikes and leather vests an unlikely but powerful symbol of protection and charity. 2 years after that fateful barbecue, the Garcias officially adopted Leo. The final court hearing was attended by his new family and a dozen Iron Sentinels who filled the back rows of the courtroom, their presence a silent testament to the community that had rallied around this one small boy. After the judge's gavel fell, making Leo a Garcia forever, Coltrane was waiting outside. Leo, now 10 years old and looking healthy and happy in a small suit, ran right into his arms. Coltrane lifted him up in a bear hug. "You did it, kid," he rumbled, his voice thick. "You're home, thank you for seeing me," Leo whispered into his ear. It was the most profound thanks Coltrane had ever received. The story could have ended there, a perfect, happy resolution. But the ripples of that day continued to spread. On the 3rd anniversary of the Open Fridge Project, the Iron Sentinels held a special open house. The mayor was there, as were representatives from Child Protective Services and a dozen other community organizations. The clubhouse was packed. Coltrane stood at a podium, looking out at the crowd. He was a man more comfortable with action than words, but he knew this moment was important. "We're bikers," he began, his voice echoing through the large room. "People see the leather and the bikes, and they make assumptions. And maybe some of those assumptions used to be true. But 3 years ago, a little boy reminded us what our true purpose is. It's not about being tough. It's about being strong for those who can't be strong for themselves," he continued. "He taught us that the scariest monster isn't something hiding in the dark. Sometimes, it's an empty pantry. It's a locked door. Our mission, with this project, is simple. We unlock the doors. We fill the pantries. We stand watch." For Leo, and for all the other kids like him, he finished his speech and stepped away from the podium to thunderous applause. As the crowd mingled, a family made their way toward him. It was the Garcias, and with them was Leo, now a confident 11-year-old. He was carrying a framed piece of paper. He held it up for Coltrane to see. It was a drawing, done in bright, colorful markers. It depicted a large, silver refrigerator. The door was wide open, and inside, every shelf was overflowing with food, milk, eggs, fruit, cakes, and pizza. Standing in front of the open fridge was a small boy with brown hair and a huge smile. Next to him stood a giant of a man with a gray beard, wearing a leather vest with a sentinel patch on the back. The man had his hand on the boy's shoulder. At the bottom, in a child's careful handwriting, were 5 words. "The fridge is always open." Coltrane looked at the drawing, then at the boy who had become a son to him in all but name. He saw the legacy of a single moment of attention, of a gut feeling that was honored, of a choice to intervene. It was a legacy of hope, written in crayon. He took the picture from Leo and knew exactly where it would go, on the wall of the clubhouse meeting room, right next to the club's charter, a permanent reminder of the promise they had made. A promise to always listen for the quietest whispers, to always see the invisible children, and to always, always leave the light on and the fridge door open.